Good morning, everyone, and thank you to Anne for the introduction. Thank you also to the IRC for hosting this important conference and for the invitation to provide some opening remarks, albeit via video once again. As I'm sure we'll hear repeatedly throughout this conference, 2020 has been a truly remarkable year, with the communications sector playing an essential role in keeping us connected, working, entertained and informed. Yet I think it's also exposed some potential market failures in our existing systems, including as they relate to digital platforms, the supply of online content and the broader information environment. So this morning I'd like to update you on the voluntary Australian Code of Practice for disinformation and news quality on digital platforms, and in that context, make some observations on the importance of collaboration between regulators, researchers and industry. In international forums such as these, I often note that Australians are early and eager adopters of technology and digital services. Yet even so, the surge in activities over the past 12 months has been truly remarkable. Our recent Trends in Online Behaviour and Technology report found that 99% of Australian adults had used the internet in the previous 6 months to June 2020, and that's up from 90% in 2019. Among those online Australians, 86% access digital news services, with 2 in 5 reporting an increase in their online news consumption since COVID-19 restrictions came into place across Australia in March 2020. More of us have also been using apps to communicate online. 77% of adult Australians used an app for messaging, voice or video calls, and 72% used social networking sites or apps such as Facebook. And given these trends, it is perhaps unsurprising that governments and regulators are increasingly turning their attention to the impact of digital platforms on domestic communications and media markets. Last year, as many of you know, Australia's Competition and Consumer Regulator completed a major review into the business models of digital platforms and the consequences for competition, consumers and society. The ACCC found that while traditional media businesses are struggling to remain commercially viable, Facebook and Google enjoy substantial market power, receiving nearly 2/3 of all online advertising revenue in Australia. It also showed that digital platforms play an increasingly important role in the Australian content ecosystem, particularly impacting on the supply, consumption, choice and quality of Australian news and journalistic content. These conclusions led the government to agree to a range of initiatives, and today I'd like to focus on one of those initiatives aimed at addressing online mis- and disinformation and how platforms are responding to the changing expectations of users and of society. This has been a new and highly topical new role and investigation for the ACMA, as I expect it has been for many of you here today throughout 2020. At the outset, I'd like to emphasise that the Australian Government has a strong focus on business-led solutions and ensuring that regulation does not inhibit innovation, jobs and growth, particularly at this point in time. Consistent with that approach, the Government has encouraged digital platforms to address issues identified in the ACCC's inquiry voluntarily in the first instance. When I first received the invitation to speak at this event, I noted with interest the theme of the conference, the Reset Agenda. And coincidentally, a very similar phase, #The Great Reset, had just started trending on Twitter and was reported on by the New York Times. And users sharing this hashtag were not referencing the World Economic Forum initiative or engaging in debate about how our regulatory settings may need to change post-COVID-19. Instead, this hashtag became a hotspot of conspiratorial narratives, full of tweets arguing the pandemic was a hoax, had been created by globalists seeking a new world order, or warning that a vaccine would be used to control the population. Conspiracy theories and fringe beliefs are certainly not new. However, with the increased reliance on digital platforms for news and information, it has also never been cheaper or easier for bots, malicious actors, or even ordinary users to spread harmful falsehoods to a large and very captive audience. Nearly 2/3 of Australians say they have encountered misinformation about COVID-19 on social media, and a variety of surveys have shown a concerning proportion of the population believe dangerous falsehoods that have been circulating online. This also isn't just about the current health crisis. As bushfires ravaged large parts of Australia, tragically, back in January this year, we saw a range of false narratives being spread by social media, from stories about arson to conspiracies around land clearing, all seeking to undermine authoritative sources. And despite the quick and fabulous work of fact-checkers, this misinformation was able to reach thousands online and was amplified even further by public figures and selected media outlets in Australia and also abroad. Local researchers later found surprisingly similar social media messages starting to appear in the US during your recent Californian wildfires, highlighting the global nature of this problem. So, building on the recommendations of the ACCC inquiry, the Australian Government has asked all major digital platforms to voluntarily develop an industry code of practice to address concerns around disinformation and news quality in Australia. And the ACMA was asked to oversee the code's development and report back to government mid-next year on whether this process has been effective. In June this year, we released a public position paper to help guide the development by those platforms of their code. In it, we suggested the platforms consider an outcomes or principles-based approach to the code, and we provided a model framework that set out our thinking as the regulator on what an effective code could look like. Development of the code is still underway, and we are continuing to work collaboratively and closely with Digi, the Australian industry body, and all the major platforms in Australia. And I did want to take this opportunity to expand on the reasons underpinning the positions that we articulated in our original code model for this audience today. The ACMA has extensive experience in working with industry to both help them develop their codes and then to administer those industry codes. And we work from the position that these instruments should place consumer concerns front and centre. Building on this perspective, we consider responses solely targeted on intent-based actions or disinformation may no longer be sufficient to address the breadth of the issues that we see. Conspiratorial communities made up of ordinary users are peddling harmful content. Malicious actors are getting better at hiding their tracks from content moderation tools, and evidence of inauthentic behaviour can take researchers, no matter how hard they work, months to uncover. Given that purpose is not easy to ascertain, our view is that platforms should instead be focused on concepts like reach, and that measures should be based on an assessment of harm that looks at both content and also at behaviour. Learning from international experiences and examples, we also stress the importance of parties committing to robust reporting arrangements under their voluntary codes. In the recent evaluation of its own pioneering voluntary disinformation code, the European Commission identified industry-wide reporting as a key area for improvement. That said, we know that the platforms have made significant progress towards addressing false and misleading news and information on their services. The promotion of dangerous falsehoods about COVID and recent election controversies has forced platforms to revisit their community standards and to strengthen measures to protect their users from inaccurate information. Yet we would observe that these actions have often been reactive, inconsistent and opaque, leaving users unsure as to why one post has been flagged while another seemingly similar post is considered acceptable on a platform. I also need to stress that this code is not an attempt to regulate free speech, nor does the Australian Government suggest that platforms be the sole arbiters of truth or that they police and remove all false content from their services. Instead, we would like to see platforms voluntarily commit to common sense measures to limit a user's exposure to particularly harmful content, to better assist users in reporting issues, and to provide greater transparency over their decision-making processes. Digital platforms and most online content have not traditionally been the subject to government intervention in Australia. In part, of course, to encourage the rollout of these incredibly innovative services. The Australian Government would still prefer that industry voluntarily step up and address issues of user or societal concern. But if the code proves ineffective or unsuccessful in driving down dangerous content online, the Australian Government may consider stronger measures. And unfortunately, we have already seen this play out with the development of the News Media Bargaining Code, initially planned to be a voluntary code to reduce the bargaining power imbalances between global platforms and Australian media outlets. When progress stagnated, the government decided to instead make the process and the code mandatory. Concerns about the impact and influence of digital platforms are global in their nature, and we can learn much from each other's experiences. But it also remains essential that we engage directly with the digital platforms. An open dialogue between us can help the platforms to better understand where we as regulators are coming from. It also helps us to better understand platforms' unique business models, their operations, and how they may go about addressing particular problems. We welcome engagement with all, and we look forward to continuing to work together to find common ground to improve the online environment for everyone. Thank you.